It is 10 o'clock now. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is 10 o'clock a.m. in Japan. Thank you for joining us today at the Symposium 2035 Decarbonization of Japan's Power System, co-hosted by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Climate Integrate. I am EcoCaster Ayako Sakurada, and I'll be moderating the session. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Today, we have a very warm day, so almost like spring, and we are seeing some of the cherry blossoms in many parts of the city. Today, we are pleased to welcome you to Akasaka, Tokyo, and to have many of you participating. And thank you very much taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. We would like to make a few housekeeping announcements. Please turn off your cell phones or put them on silent mode. Today, simultaneous interpretation service is available. Please use the receiver at hand. Please adjust the channel of your receiver to your language. Channel 1 is Japanese, and channel 2 is English. For those of you online, please click on the interpretation button on your screen and select Japanese, English, or the original audio. For those in the audience, please access the QR code to view today's materials on your device. Online participants will receive a link to the chat room. We will also be taking photos and videos today for record keeping. We will try to avoid showing the faces of the audience, but if you would prefer not to be shown, please let us know when you leave. The webinar recording will be made available on the web at a later date. When you speak, we are able to secure social distance, so please take off your masks when you speak. Today, on March 1st, the U.S. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory released a report on decarbonizing Japan's electricity system titled 2035 Decarbonization of Japan's Power System. Today's symposium will feature commentary from the report's authors and an exchange of views with Japanese and international experts on the report's implications for Japan and its future prospects. In conjunction with the Berkeley Institute's scenario presentation, Climate Integrate will also present its report on the policy recommendations needed to achieve the shift to renewable energy outlined in the scenarios. The decarbonization of the electricity system is a crucial step toward achieving net zero emissions. Please stay with us until the very end. We'd like to start the program. We'd like to hear the address of Dr. Richard Duke, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change, United States of America. Please find his profile in today's presentation materials. Please take the floor.
Thank you and good morning. Very much appreciate Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Climate Integrate for organizing this event, and above all for preparing this critical report. The global energy crisis, prompted by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, has underscored the urgency of speeding up, not slowing down, the clean energy transition. And most essentially, we need to start that process in the power sector, which is the prime mover for the overall energy transition, where clean power can then electrify everything. It is imperative that we address the short-term energy crisis while maintaining our focus on keeping a safer 1.5 degree centigrade climate future within reach. This will have enormous long-term benefits for Japan's energy security and its climate security. Japan has long focused on its energy security, and appropriately enough. And we've seen just now how problematic a fossil-based economy can be given the vicissitudes of fossil energy prices, in particular in times of global crisis. One of our top global priorities today, agreed at the leader level, is the rapid deployment of clean energy at scale to displace unabated fossil fuels. When countries rise to this challenge, they realize multiple benefits at once. First, economic efficiency is improved because renewables are increasingly the most economic option. And we see that very clearly in this report, which shows a path to reduced electricity costs while delivering 90% clean power. Second, energy security is enhanced by displacing fossil fuels and moving to renewable electricity, which is not subject to ups and downs in fossil fuel prices. And third, of course, climate security by reducing emissions and at the same time, of course, improving public health. The IEA tells us that all advanced economies need to have a net zero power sector by about 2035. Indeed, the United States has announced such a target and has passed multiple legislative successes, including the Inflation Reduction Act, in order to cut US emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels in 2030. As the most significant climate legislation in US history, the Inflation Reduction Act in particular is propelling us to accelerate clean energy solutions at an unprecedented pace. And Japan is a critical partner in this effort to keep a safer 1.5 degrees centigrade future alive, both as chair of the G7 this year and as a global economic leader. Like the United States, Japan has set an ambitious goal of its own to reduce emissions by 46% by 2030 and to make strenuous efforts to reach a 50% reduction. What is most exciting about this report is that it shows that Japan can meet its target while at the same time reducing costs and dramatically improving energy security. This gives us a new optimism about Japan rising to its commitment and meeting its challenges in the energy sector. Due to the decreasing costs of solar, wind, especially offshore wind, and battery technology, Japan can achieve an overwhelmingly decarbonized electricity sector by 2035. Not only would this help reduce Japan's emissions, it would reduce electricity costs and improve energy security by reducing reliance on imported coal and LNG. Of course, such a shift will require strong political will and climate leadership, the kind of leadership Japan has shown before. We look forward to deepening our dialogue with Japanese colleagues as both our countries seek to accelerate the clean energy transition. Thank you again for your attention today to this incredibly timely and important report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard Duke. We had a remark by Dr. Richard Duke, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change, United States of America. We will now move on to the first part of the presentation of the 2035 report. We will take time for Q&A after all the presentations. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on the screen if you are participating online. Please understand that we may not be able to answer all the questions due to time constraints. Please feel free to write your questions in either Japanese or English. For those of you who are present here, we'd like to take questions from you, and so we ask you to raise your hands when you have questions. The first presentation is by Dr. Kenji Shiraishi, Berkeley Laboratory Research Fellow and Climate Integrate Board Member, who lead authored the report 2035 Decarbonization of Japan's Power System. He will speak for about half an hour. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here out of your busy schedules. For those of you who are participating here in this room, and also for all of you who are participating online. Today, on behalf of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Kyoto University, we'd like to make a report with the collaboration of many experts, both in Japan and also in the United States. We have been discussing this issue. So this is the outcome of the various discussions we have had. This shows the authors. So I am Shiraishi, the lead author, and Won-Young Park, Nikit Atayanker, and the Envoy, and the Kanyal, and also Professor Morotomi, Jiang, and Phadke. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory was established in 1931 rather, as an organization that belonged to Department of Energy, or DOE. And the institute conducts scientific research in 6 fields, including energy science, and has produced 16 Nobel Prize laureates. The research team studies clean energy integration in major countries around the world using the latest data and models in their electricity departments, especially focusing on renewables. And our institute already published reports for USA in 2020, which was followed by our report on India in 2021 and China in 2022. And this year, we are publishing the report for Japan. And also after a couple of weeks, the new report for Korea will also be published. I am back in Japan, and I am reading and also watching TV in the news, and every day there has been a report about the increase of the power price hikes and also the shortage of electricity. In Japan, the power sustenance is very low, so we have to say that Japan depends on foreign fossil fuel imports for 90% of its primary energy consumption. So especially for the power, almost 100% of the energy is dependent on the import. And so the first year is the import price, CIF price of coal and LNG in Japan. Back in 1990s, it was very low, and we were able to say that there had been the transition. And then after that, after the Fukushima accident, there had been a rise, and then there was a drop. And then at this moment, especially in the case of LNG and also in to some extent in the coal, we have seen the sharp rise of the prices. So every year we are importing about 10 trillion yen or even more for the power generation. On the other hand, the technologies advancements and the drastic reduction in solar, wind, and battery storage costs present new opportunities to make clean electricity generation more affordable. So that means that we are able to see the reduction of costs, as can be seen on the right-hand side, LCOE of wind and solar in Japan. So we are seeing the sharp drop of the cost of these renewable energy. And also about the onshore, the wind, it is also decreasing in price. So against this backdrop, the energy risk for the world is something that is also serious in Japan. But at the same time, we are now able to focus on lean energy, so which is domestic energy. So we are able to replace the inexpensive, the lean energy, replace the older energy with the new leaner energy. So this way we are able to increase the level of the energy security. At the same time, we are able to reduce CO2 emissions. So this is posing a major opportunity. And these are the three questions that we raised for this report. So the first point is what effect will recent declines in wind, solar, and battery storage costs have on the pace and scale of renewable resource development? We haven't had the assumptions, but these assumptions are now changing rapidly. And with that, what kind of changes would arise? And also about the energy prices, what clean energy goals are technically and economically feasible given the inherent uncertainties, including in electricity demand growth, fossil fuel prices, and renewables and energy storage costs. And then thirdly, how can a faster transition to clean energy deliver not only environmental and economic benefits, but also reduce security risks related to dependence on imported fossil fuels? So these are the 3 points we had research on. And then this page shows the methods for the research. This study analyzed optimal or least cost investment in hourly operation of Japan's power system from 2020 through 2035. And also we have economic dispatch and also unit cost, the model. So here we focus on the 3 things, which is the power generation, storage, and the transmission. And for all of this, we discussed the capital expenditure for each year and also hourly operation optimization. And then about the scenario, we looked at the 2030 targets of the 6th strategic energy plan, which is 90% clean energy and 38 to 38%. And 59% the non-fossil fuel. And then for the 2035, the target here is to have the core scenario. We use the term clean energy scenario, which is to realize the goal of 90% clean energy by 2035. But at the same time, it is important to make sure that it is dependable, which is to avoid outages. So I am going to use the term clean energy. Please note that this is the kind of energy that would not produce the CO2. So mainly I'm talking about the renewables, and hydrogen, and nuclear sources. And then these are the major assumptions. And as I said, the renewables in 2030 must exceed the targets in the 6th strategic energy plan, and the 90% clean energy and coal phase out by 2035. So this is also the target of among the G7 countries. And also about the fossil fuel prices, as I just said, in 2022, there had been a sharp rise of the prices in 2022. But in this core scenario, we are using the prices which is cheaper than the current level, which is before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also lifetime of coal and LNG is assumed to be 50 years. About the existing nuclear power plants, this is based on this the strategic energy plan. So there has been some applications or the restart. So in a nutshell, the all existing nuclear restarts and would be granted for the 20-year lifetime extension. Costs are taken from Japan's data. So we have the working group for the cost. So we mainly use Japan's data, while solar and wind and batteries are based on the global cost, because there has been the global decline of the cost. So we are utilizing NREL, the projection, which is called ATB. This is issued every year. So we use that in the specific the context of Japan. So there has been some modification made for the ATB. And then this core scenario is the clean energy. So we have conducted a sensitivity analysis. So for example, if there is a delay of the reduction of the cost for the wind and solar, and also this is about for example, if you have the fossil fuel price which is comparable to 2022, or the power demand which is set at the level which is supposed to be the constant, and also about the scenario without the extension of 20 years for the nuclear power plants. So I'd like to speak about the key findings here. First of all, regarding the coal power plants and new natural gas plants, without those, 90% clean grid in Japan is possible with the high reliability dependable. And on the left-hand side, you can see the energy mix. On the right-hand side, you can see the total installed capacity. Coal at the very bottom. In accordance with the strategic energy plan, achieve the 2030 level and then phase out towards 2035. And as of 2035, renewable energy is to account for 70% altogether, with some nuclear and LNG. And in the 2030s, what will grow would be the offshore wind, 41 gigawatt total in 2035. In 2040, 40 to 45 gigawatt is Japan's official target, but we are assuming that that will be realized earlier. As for energy batteries, storage in 2030s, we need to introduce that because there are some hydro and wind, which are intermittent renewable energy, which will account for a larger portion. And we already have many offshore wind float up until 2020, so we can use that, and that will suffice. But going forward, in order to increase the flexibility of the system, 29 gigawatt or 116 gigawatt hour lithium-ion battery storage capacity will be needed. So more specifically, what will be the hourly dispatch operation? In our model, we looked at 4 years worth multiplied by 1 hour. Looking at it on a monthly average is what you see here. Time, x-axis, midnight to midnight, and each graph representing the average hourly dispatch of each month. Demand is shown in the dotted line. As you can see, depending on the season, it varies quite a bit. And as for solar and wind, again, big fluctuation, but in any month, we can see that there will be no blackout. The steady operation, steady power supply is secured in any month. Especially when you see the bottom part, you can see that the battery and hydro pumping would be absorbing the redundant supply during the daytime, which will be used during the early morning hours. For example, in May and November, we see much solar, whereas wind, it minimizes, and winter it maximizes. So there are seasonal fluctuation, which will be made up for through natural gas LNG. And in terms of reliability or dependability, what we focused is the adequacy, whether the capacity is sufficiently secured over a 4-year period. No blackout lasting 1 hour, and record-breaking heat waves or cold waves. Should there be such stresses, even at the highest net load peak, with that stress, would there be a blackout is what we calculated, and we were able to confirm that that would be avoided. This is the highest net load week of summer, and this is for the winter time. So that is regarding the adequacy or the reliability, dependability. And this is about cost.
Electricity costs from the 90% clean grid are lower than today's cost. 6% lower is shown here. On the left-hand side, this is without SCC or social cost of carbon. Even without considering that, we can see that it will be 6% lower. By electricity costs, we're talking about the wholesale, which is generation, storage, and the transmission and distribution. The integrated cost, the interregional transmission costs, all included. So when we do consider SCC, the social cost of carbon, we find that the social benefit would be increased, as you can see on the right-hand side. And as for the renewable energy cost, the fuel cost, and the battery storage cost, the duration of the operation of nuclear power plants, there are so many uncertainties related to those. And so here you can see also the sensitivity. First is the fuel high, which is fuel price staying at the 2022 level. The actual wholesale price is now around 15 yen, very high. And compared to that, we can see that clean energy is lower, and therefore the cost would go down. In other words, the benefit of clean energy would become even larger. And as for renewable energy cost or battery cost, should they stay at the high level, which is shown in the RE high line, the dark green, even at that scenario, almost 0% variance. So cost would not go up. Whereas if the renewable energy cost is lower than what we expect, then around 10% reduction in cost could be realized. And what about the demand? If the electricity demand continues to stay high with the electrification and others, in that scenario, still the cost will go down, as you can see. The low nuclear scenario, 20% is the assumption in 2030. But if the nuclear operation is terminated after 40 years of operation, then the cost will go up slightly. Still, it will be about the same as for 25. And this is the 2035 generation mix under 6 scenarios. On the left is the base scenario. If the fuel cost remains high, as was the case last year, then rather than continuing to use the fossil fuel, the combination of various types of renewable energy would be less costly. Whereas in the low nuclear scenario, nuclear portion would be slightly smaller, which will be compensated for through solar and offshore wind. So even with those uncertainties, we find that overall cost would not vary that much, that it will be lower than today. So why is it that the cost would go down? The biggest reason is, as you can see at the center, the fuel cost of over 4 trillion yen would be saved compared to 2020. Even at the fuel price level of pre-Ukraine days, still we can see savings. The electricity system with more renewable energy, the cost structure is going to change. The fixed cost, in other words, the initial investment would account for the large proportion, and therefore financing would become important. RE, battery, transmission lines, those capex would be additional cost. And then we can normalize that over years, and on a net basis, net savings of 6% is the result of our calculation. So fuel costs will come down. And the import of fossil fuel could be reduced by 85% from 4 trillion yen to around 600 billion yen, which would enhance Japan's energy security. Fossil fuel prices fluctuates very rampantly, and people's lives will become immune to that or less affected by those fluctuations.
Now, we are now shifting to the introduction of the renewable penetration or clean energy. So it is quite beneficial, as I have just explained. Now, the point here is whether it is feasible. So this will be a major moot point. And then please take a look at the left-hand side. This is from 2014 to 2019 level of the renewables penetration. And then, as can be seen, for each year, the largest figure had been 9.7 gigawatt in 2015. And then if you just level it out, then we have to say that this will be reduced to this level. And this is a clean energy scenario. This is from 2020 to 2035. The average figure would be 10 gigawatt per year. The integration, the renewable penetration of 10 gigawatt per year is needed. And then up until now, the largest figure for a single year was 9.7. So that means that we have to continue working on it for 10 years and 15 years with the maximum level of effort. So with regards to the feasibility, yes, we have done this. So that means that certainly it is the largest level. So this is quite challenging, but still it is not that we have to do the double or triple or quadruple the effort. So that's the feasible. In the case of Japan, the PV is the highest, the level of opportunity. So starting from 2035, we will focus more on the offshore wind. We have to have a major shift in this area. And then this shows the cumulative investment. So we are now shifting from the fuel price centered the cost structure to the capital expenditure. So you see the cumulative investment, and the total figure would be 38 trillion yen for the clean energy scenario achievement. So in the case of GX, we say the 150 trillion yen in 10 years. So based on that, that would be 40 trillion yen. So this is a part of the 100 trillion yen. Needless to say, we will see a sharp decline of CO2 with the shift to clean energy. And here, at this point, we are able to say 92% of the reduction. This is for the grid connected, the connected one. So this is about 90%. And also the emission factor also is declining down to 40% or so. So that means that the carbon, the energy can be created. So this could be used for residential areas or EVs or the transport. And we are able to reduce CO2 in other areas with the CO2 emission decline in the production and also the electrification. So that means that we are able to have a ripple effect for other areas so that it is possible to reach carbon neutrality at an early stage. So these are the economic and the environmental and the security related benefits of the clean energy introduction. And I talked about feasibility and also economic factors for that. So now we know that it is possible to realize. Then, as was mentioned by Dr. Duke, it is important to have the policy support, not only in the economics or the costs, but also for other areas as well. It is important to eliminate major blocks or the barriers to achieve these goals. So based on that, we would like to make some policy recommendations. So this is first, establishing medium-term policy targets beyond 2030. We have to have clear the targets for example, for the target for the renewable generation and the coal phase out. This is one thing. And also, in recent years, we have many policy packages, including carbon pricing. So it is important to create coherent policy packages to enable the medium-term policy targets, including research, development, and demonstration. The second point is accelerating the renewables deployment and coal-fired power phase-out by mitigating environmental externalities. And for the renewables, we have FIT and auctions. So we have been introducing the various policy tools. So in order to accelerate this process, it is important to have a set of policies to enhance this. However, even if we have the higher penetration of the renewables, it is impossible to proceed with the higher model, so higher speed. So it is important to use the pricing. So that will be 6,000 yen per the level of the carbon pricing would be important. And alongside with the coal phase out, we will be able to reach the goal. So I talked about cost. Then on top of that, it is important to focus more on the institutional and social barriers. The zoning is at this moment problematic. So it is important to establish qualified renewable energy zones with suitable topography and land use designations to avoid delays in permitting and deployment. So it is important to start the connection between the grid and the zones, and also integrate the zoning process in transmission planning. And also it is important to involve stakeholders at an early stage. And also the fourth point is pursuing a just energy transition through targeted assistance policies. So it is important to alleviate pains. For example, at this point, for example, we have to provide support for the communities in which the coal-fired generation is the main industry. So the risk mitigation is important. So this is something that is being done in the United States. So maybe we can have a retraining for the people who are the engineers for the coal-fired power plants, and then they are able to work in the power plants and the renewables, or maybe they could have they can continue utilizing the infrastructures, so they are able to shift it to the clean energy. And also about the carbon pricing, the carbon pricing has the regressive property, so it is important to use the carbon revenues to reimburse households and the businesses for part of their utility expenditures, reducing the tax burden. And last part is the technical issue about the integration of VRE, variable renewable energy. It is important to have flexibility. So in order to enable that, it is important to have the investment for the technologies. And then it is important again to ensure system dependability, enhancing operational flexibility, and boosting energy efficiency. For the energy conservation, it is also very important. So we try to cover many areas. We try to set the scope as wide as possible, but there has been some areas which have not been covered. We have been focusing very much on the renewables. So we have the demand response and also CCS and other technologies. If we add these technologies, then we are able to optimize the system. So at this point, our conclusion is rather conservative. So it is important to also expand our scope to the new technologies. And also we have the data model. And so we have the recent models, but it makes sense to have the long-term data. So we would be able to understand the various issues, for example, loss of load predictability or optimal power flow calculation, and also maybe alternate current transmission flow of both intra and inter-regional transmission lines. So we could use the detailed topology to do this. And finally, the operational impacts of the day-ahead intraday forecast errors. We are utilizing deterministic the model, But in what way would it have an impact if it has the forecast errors in RE and load? So these are the things we would like to continue working on. So as was mentioned, with the shift or transition to clean energy, we are able to reduce the cost or eliminate the carbon emission, and also we are able to have the security. And then we will be able to eliminate the heavy metals so that we are able to improve people's health, and energy security also would be reinforced. So in order to do that, it is important to have strong policies. They are certainly required to take advantage of multiple benefits of 90% clean energy grid. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shiraishi. Economic, environmental, and security in all those aspects. The clean energy that is dependable is possible in Japan, was the message with various effects and data. Thank you very much for sharing with us the outcome, the fruit of long years of your research. Thank you. So this is a report on Japan by Berkeley Research Laboratories. And this follows a report on US and China. And in the nearest future, there will be a report on South Korea that will be reported. So regarding the existing reports on US and China, we will have two researchers talk to us. First, about the US study, Dr. Amol Phadke. You have about 7 minutes. Please start.
Thank you. And really, it's an honor, and I'm very excited to be participating in this panel. So I want to kind of give confidence to the results that it is not just in Japan that we have found that 90% clean power is lower or cost effective. In fact, as Kenji said, that the whole thing started with we producing a major report on US, where we found that because of rapidly declining costs, US could achieve 90% clean power by 2035. And this is just showing the resource mix of US grid with and without policy. Again, very similar results as Japan. US grid is significantly bigger, but very similar results in terms of rapid deployment of renewables, replaces fossil fuels, achieves 90% clean grid. Some of the events where low solar and wind is covered by gas and battery storage. Again, very similar results that the costs do not go up because of renewable deployment. And all this analysis is done without considering the massive fluctuations in fuel prices. We have seen time and again that fuel markets don't behave in a steady state fashion. So in fact, all the results that we are showing on achieving 90% clean power and its cost and benefit are very conservative. The benefits in reality could be much higher. It's kind of providing a secure, stable, cost-effective power to consumers and industry and increasing its competitiveness. One thing that was most exciting to a lot of policymakers in the US about our study is that we also estimated that the number of jobs such a transformation would create. And the results were pretty staggering. Essentially, you are replacing fuel with massive construction and massive investments in infrastructure. So what we found in the US was that it increased, it supports more than 500,000 jobs, permanent jobs, and multiple job years. And there was a bit of decrease in the jobs for operations, but they are more than compensated by the jobs in deploying infrastructure. So when we did several briefings to policymakers, in addition to the cost results, the policymakers were very interested in the finding that, in fact, it supports massive amounts of job deployment. This report informed, we did several briefings to policymakers, and this report, in fact, informed the current US target of 90% clean, 100% clean power by 2035. So this work has gone through a lot of scrutiny from academics and policymakers. So that may lend some more confidence in our work that's led by Kenji on Japan, that the results are very similar. And based on some of these findings, in fact, the world's largest economy has really acted and set a target and doing several policies to implement and actually reach this target. In addition to this is that we find that once you achieve clean power sector and independent power sector, its benefit can be extended to other sectors with electrification. And I know that Japan is one of the pioneers of electrification, especially of electrification of heating. So we followed up this report with a major report again in the US, where we looked at how this can be combined with massive electrification of transport and what are the consumer benefits of doing so. So we modeled a power system and a transportation system where we looked at phasing out the sale of internal combustion engines by 2030, 2035 timeframe for both cars and trucks, and looked at the technical feasibility, looked at the grid impacts, and looked at the consumer benefits. This is the next version of the 2035 report. And what we found was that US consumers, because electric transport is so efficient and clean power is so economical, US consumers will save $2.7 trillion between 2020 and 2050, about $100 to $200 billion over the next 30 years. That translates into an average saving of about $1,000 a year per household every year over the next 20 to 30 years. So it's not the benefits of clean deployment of power doesn't really stop at the power sector. If combined with electrification, it can really be extended into multiple benefits. So Kenji mentioned that this is all great on paper, but actually to achieve this on the ground, you really need strong policy support. And I'm so happy to see that the US passed one of the biggest legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and combined with the bipartisan infrastructure bill to provide significant, stackable, and long-lasting incentives to promote clean electricity, clean electric vehicles, and it is one of the largest grant packages or incentive packages in world's history. This will be combined at the state level or at the EPA level in terms of regulations as well. So, and we are already seeing massive investments of battery manufacturing plants and solar plants coming to the US. So overall, the declining cost of renewables and battery storage has created an enormous opportunity in the face of significant challenges on climate and on energy security. And given that Japan has one of the best offshore wind resources, is one of the best engineering talents and ability to do heavy industry, I think it's really poised to take advantage of these technologies and really chart a clean future for itself and for the world. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phadke. So this was a report for the United States, and this has been utilized, and also this has been supported by person in charge for the policy formation. We were able to learn a great deal from this. Next, we have Dr. Jiang Lin, who will talk about the China study for about 7 minutes. Please.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to share the result on our China analysis. Again, this is a joint effort by research from Berkeley Lab, Energy Innovation, and UC Berkeley. So let me first share the 4 major conclusions of our China analysis. First, China could reach 80% carbon-free electricity by 2035 at 6% lower cost compared to the current policy scenarios. China's power grid can be reliably operated with a high level of non-fossil generation, even during summer and winter peaks. The faster transition to a clean power system can reduce additional emission and health impact by more than 50% compared to the current policy scenarios, and job gains in clean energy sector more than offset those lost in coal-related industries. So this chart shows our modeling result of the current policy scenarios. If you look at the right chart, it shows roughly a current policy target of 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar by 2030. Coal generation is likely to peak around 2030, but still there's close to 50% coal generation by 2030. In contrast, if you look at our clean energy scenarios, which would mandate trying to reach 80% clean power by 2035, which would mean coal generation can peak before 2025 and equivalent to installing 3,000 gigawatts of wind and solar by 2035, and equivalently also roughly 2,000 gigawatts by 2030. So that this is a modeling grid operation. We have a simulated operation, hourly operation throughout the year, and here we're presenting the result for summer peak week, which is the last week of August. You can see that even without building new coal plant, this chart shows China's grid can be reliably operated even in summer peak. During this week, the maximum coal dispatch is roughly 613 gigawatts. That's roughly 1/3 the peak load and only 60% of the current coal fleet. Again, very similar conclusions with our US and Japan analysis. The clean energy scenario actually can have a lower cost. This is again very conservative assumption for our current policy scenarios. We're assuming fuel costs roughly in the 2019 level. Given the rising cost of fossil fuels, the saving is likely to be higher than this. So when you hear about building 3,000 gigawatts of wind or solar by 2035, that seems an enormous target. Is that possible? If you break it down in 5-year increment, you can see that translates into building roughly 120 gigawatts of solar in wind this 5 years, and roughly 170 gigawatts in the next 5-year period, and roughly 215 gigawatts between 2030 and 2035. If you see the dashed line, which is what China installed in 2020, roughly about 120 gigawatts of wind and solar. So our target are very much actually in line with the current speed of new construction in solar wind. In fact, the most latest target this year for solar wind announced by the National Energy Administration is about 160 gigawatts, actually outpacing our simulated annual total for the current 5 years. Now, as we move to renewable dominated systems in China by 2035, the coal operation coal plant is going to be very different. If you look at the right side of the bar, each dot is representing one coal power plant. This is essentially a capacity factor for coal plants. So by 2035, half of the coal plant in China will be only running at a 10% or less. And coal plants are designed to run 60, 70% of the time. So this is going to be an enormous challenge in running coal plant economically. I saw there was a question about, do we evaluate variability of renewable generation? We, in fact, in China analysis, utilize 35 years of weather data to simulate the output of solar wind. We find even in the lowest week of generation for solar wind. There's still plenty of power in China's power system to support the demand growth. Here we're showing in the summer net peak week, the decline in renewable generation nationwide is roughly 12%. And there's plenty of other coal, natural gas, nuclear, and hydro to support operation of the Chinese power grid. Similar to our US report, we also estimate the job gain and losses. This is occur in different sectors. So overall, there's roughly 4.8 million jobs created, but also significant loss in jobs, both in coal mining sector, as well as the other sectors, but with a net gain of 1.9 million jobs by 2035. So again, this is a very positive employment story and positive growth story for China. In addition to the employment and carbon benefit, 80% clean grid would also reduce additional conventional air pollutions by over 50%. That can translate into reduction in premature mortality by 52% or so. That's a significant benefit in terms of public health. So I will stop my presentation here. We can take your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jiang. As for questions, we will be taking questions at the panel discussion session at the very end after all the presentations are made. We find that there are many commonalities between the US and China. Peak held 2030. Towards that, the target has been set, we understand. Thank you very much for your report, Dr. Jiang Lin. And next, I would like to invite Professor Toru Morotomi of Government Graduate School of Economics of the Faculty of Economics of Kyoto University, please. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Morotomi from Kyoto University. I am one of the co-authors, and I'd like to provide the following comments based on that position. And I'm very delighted to see this report being completed, especially Dr. Shiraishi, the leading author. Thank you so very much. And here you can see the significance of this report towards decarbonization. What impacts can we expect? And 2035 targets. Towards that target year, can we really see the pathway towards decarbonization here in Japan? Is that really doable, feasible to build models, apply the latest data? You know, that approach is really important in verifying whether this is feasible or not, especially what type of pathways are we talking about? What's going to happen to the power electricity cost, especially since the economic modeling for the least cost is being pursued. We have to see whether it is feasible. Is it really possible to find the pathway towards the least cost with reliability assured? And that is presented in this report. Towards 2035, as was the case in the US and China, to drastically reduce CO2 emissions, it is doable, is being demonstrated in the three reports in three different countries. As Dr. Shiraishi emphasized at the beginning, we are faced with the energy crisis today, triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is crisis, but this could be an opportunity as well. And that is the concept that we would like to really share. Looking at the energy situation in Japan, having said that, with METI taking the lead, nuclear power generation and fossil fuel power, conventional source. Revival, it appears, is being promoted. The scenario that presented today is renewable energy centered, but looking at the direction of the government policy, conventional methods, fossil fuel, especially coal and nuclear, continuing to be used. That is the scenario that we see from the government. So we need to really identify what the issues are with that policy. We have to present a convincing scenario that clean energy is possible. And I think we were successful in doing that in this report. At least the significance of this report is that we provided the topic for discussion to start, the benefit and cost. Obviously, benefit outweighs cost, as was indicated in the US case. It's not just the economic benefits, but the co-benefits. We see less air, we see better air quality, which will benefit for human health. And in terms of economic security, which is one of the buzzwords today, by lowering the reliance on fossil fuel imports, we know that that is a great benefit that we can enjoy. And in this report, we presented several policy proposals, which is another important aspect of this report. Towards decarbonization, we need to set a schedule in Japan, developing these scenarios, roadmaps with specific milestones. What are the targets for 2030, 2050? We have those long-term targets, but we don't have the schedules in between. The specifics are lacking. I'm afraid that is an issue. Regarding carbon pricing, that's another very important. And the cabinet decision was made very recently. And it is good that Japan is moving towards that direction, but the level and the timing obviously is not sufficient. So for these factors, at University of Kyoto, in my class, we are focusing on the macroeconomic models. The first point, Hirata-san participated in this report as well. The second one about climate policy. This was adopted in the climate policy, and there is another research conducted by the Renewable Energy Institute. These are all a simulation model, quantitative model research. And with these reports increasing in number, we're hoping that there'll be a momentum that will be raised for the policy discussions. So this is, I guess, the most important slides today for me. Personally, I have a feeling that power demand would further decline considerably. In fact, after peaking in 2007, the power consumption has been declining by 10% or so. And after peaking in 2011, 7 or 8% decline with a further population decline. And looking at the production, although it is coming back, even with electrification progressing, perhaps power demand might fall. So the government of Japan is currently talking about the energy crisis and is pushing for the restart of nuclear power plants and the continued use of coal-fired plants. So there might be a question mark there. And regarding the nuclear power plants, 20% is the projection for 2030. it assumes that the report assumes that all the plants will operate for 60 years, but that might not realize. So low nuclear scenario, I think, is more realistic. And Professor Kumiyama of University Tokyo and we are conducting the joint research, and Professor Kumiyama projects 10% as the nuclear fraction. And demand response modeling, I think, is important, as Dr. Shiraishi mentioned towards the end of his presentation. The battery we used policy-wise and model-wise, including the demand side prediction is very important, although in terms of modeling, that's more complex. Another concern is the very special scenario by the government of Japan and the industry is to continue the coal-fired phase-outs after 2030. But looks like what it is thinking right now is to continue the coal-fired and gas-fired plants, plus combine that with ammonia and hydrogen, mixed hydrogen. So we have to think of that factor to be added. And that needs to be evaluated on top of what was covered in the report. That is all. Regarding the carbon pricing, if I have some time left towards the end, I'll talk about that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morotomi. So you just talked about the encouraging remarks for the progress of our activities. Now we'd like to invite Professor Takamura, Yukari Takamura, from the Institute of Future Initiatives of Tokyo University. We'd like you to speak for 10 minutes. Please show the slide. Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Takamura. People say that I am too busy to respond to their mails, and so some people say that I am not that they are not quite sure whether I am alive or dead, but I am alive, all right. So to show that I'm here, so I would like to speak about the. Thank you very much for inviting me to the symposium for the launch of the report of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Climate Integrate, and so. So first and foremost, I'd like to speak about the background of the report. So I'd like to focus more on the significance of the introduction of this report. And then on the second half, I'd like to raise some questions to Shiraishi-san and Morotomi sensei. So as you can see, this is a study on pathways, feasibility, benefits, and implications, challenges for decarbonization of Japan's power sector by 2035. What was very striking was that this was a very precious report focusing on the benefits, not only on the kind of things we have to do, but rather you talked about energy cost reduction and energy security, and also, as was mentioned by Jiang and Amol, the benefit for the health of the people and also employment. So the benefits have been studied for the energy transition. Decarbonization certainly is the most important, but at the same time, it is important to pay attention to the benefits. So these are the kind of, this is a kind of viewpoint with which we have to read the paper. And then next is the background or significance of the background of the report. For one thing, Japan holds the presidency of the G7 this year. And then there was the G7 in 2021 in the United Kingdom, and then last year, Germany held the presidency and had the G7 Elmau summit meeting, and the kind of the common knowledge or common agreement is that it is something we have to do before anything else. So at the Amol summit, there have been the leaders communicate, and the 1.5 degree the scenario of the COP26 and 27 and G7 agreement has been the basis of the communique. So the aiming for this 1.5 degree, and as can be seen, it says that we commit to achieving a fully or predominantly decarbonized power sector by 2035. So here, the term here is the predominantly or fully. So that means that it is important to focus on the decarbonization of power sector, and leaders of the G7 countries agreed on this. So, and also, if you think about the pathways and feasibilities and the implications of the 2035 decarbonization, it is politically very important. One of the reasons behind the communique agreement is the IEA scenario, which is IEA net zero scenario by 2050. And it says, well, I'm talking about the third one here, and here it says by the year 2035, the advanced countries would have to realize the net zero for the power industry. So this is a milestone shown here, and also about the climate change under the Paris Agreement. Every 5 years, the countries would have to submit the NDCs. In 2021, many countries submitted this NDC in 2021, and then in 2025, we will have to submit this kind of the NDC. So countries are obliged to submit a new NDC in 2025, and it is expected to be the 2035 NDC under the Paris Agreement, and about 85% of the emission is the CO2 from the energy use. So that means that the emissions, the CO2 emission should take into account how the energy is used in 2035. Alongside with that, the companies also are required to look into the climate change. So important analysis for private sector in taking the climate actions, including climate-related disclosure, are required. So in that respect, they are providing very important set of information. Now I'd like to raise the issues. So I think Morotomi Sensei also talked about this. The first is the assumptions for nuclear power generation. The major assumption for the strategy in looking at the 2030 is already there. So it is not that we try to eliminate or lower the value of this, but it is important to see the situation where nuclear power would not be used widely. So in that situation, it is important to consider the kind of decarbonization pathways, and we have to understand what measures should be taken for decarbonization of power sector by 2021 in case nuclear power plants would not operate on the assumptions. So this is based on the JIVE, and this is based on the chart created by the Genshitoku Sangyo Shimbun, which is a newspaper for the nuclear power sector. And then here it says 24.4% by 2021, and then for 2020, the percentage of the nuclear power is 4%. So there has been some increase. And then we have the 33 units which can be operated, and starting 2015 there has been some restart, and at this moment there has been a restart in 2021, and then at this point there has been 10 units which are in operation, but in 2022 for some various reasons it is decreasing. So we are not quite sure of the scenario. Certainly the nuclear power the scenario is presented. So my question here is there could be the unintentional troubles or maybe accident. This is something we have to avoid, but still there could be some litigation risks in that situation. In what way should we be prepared? So this is a question I'd like to raise. The second point is about the introduction of the renewables and the 10 gigawatt per year. Well, this is surprisingly large. Actually, I'm rather scared. In 2021, including PV and all the renewables included, it's only 5 gigawatt. And then in 2021, the FIP, the authorized figure, was, well, actually, some of them are not limited to that, and the figure is 1.3 gigawatt. So what is requested or it's recommended is to raise that to 10 gigawatt. And so in 2021, it is 5 gigawatt. And so how are we able to raise that figure to 10 gigawatt? So this is where I'd like to receive some recommendation. Maybe this should be based on the FIP systems or FIT systems. And also maybe as was mentioned by the Dr. Shiraishi, we have to have the demonstration and also R&D. So I'd like to know more about it. What kind of things should we do? And also maybe this could be done by the final report by Dr. Shiraishi. So it is important to look into the fuel price, fuel price transition, and also the carbon price the futures. So there could be a major change for that. In the case of the renewables, cost projection is important, but at the same time, carbon pricing would have would be a key. In what way would it be introduced in Japan? And maybe this could be something we would like to discuss in the panel discussion. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Takamura. Thank you very much for your comment. Lastly, not the least, from Climate Integrate, we have Hirata-san talk about the policy proposals. Hirata-san, please. Good morning. Kimiko Hirata from Climate Integrate. Our organization has been in existence for a little over a year. We are a think tank, but from the very early dates, we were chosen as a partner by Berkeley Labs to prepare for this report and many other initiatives. I'd like to thank the Berkeley Labs for that. Regarding the significance of this report, the two speakers before me have already emphasized the significance. Now, my personal action is of the 90%, 70% of RE introduction is doable. And in terms of supply and cost, it is doable. So we should have confidence in that. And regarding the nuclear, in the low nuclear scenario, 77% would be renewable energy if we take the low nuclear scenario. So that is what was suggested in this report. In Japan, the general view is that renewable energy is not likely to play such a big part over such a short period of time. So I think this report is going to be very stimulating. Another interesting thing, I don't know if you have noticed, but in the scenario, replacing the nuclear with new ones, and the mix of combustion of ammonia and hydrogen are not included up to 2035 because they are of high cost. Under GX plan of the government, it's quite different. So that difference is a really important suggestion for us to engage in further discussions. And so policy proposals are made in this report, which are very suggestive. And the key is how we are to translate them into the actual policy discussions in Japan. And today, we issued a report that includes 10 proposals, 3 national visions, and 7 policy measures to realize what is suggested in the report. So we have 10 proposals altogether, 3 national visions, and 7 proposals. The 3 visions. First is a grand design for transition to renewable energy. 1.5 degrees aligned design, and we need to have industrial policies, and we need to adopt the cost-effective technologies. We need grand design to make that a reality. And this would also mean that we're talking about the grand design for a system change that would affect the world, the nature, the way we work, the way we live. The second is the ambitious targets for GHG reductions and renewable targets. And coal-fired power phase-out is critical in doing that. And hydrogen and ammonia and nuclear, which are of high cost, needs to be revisited again. The third is the just transition strategies to be developed as a national strategy. Impact to the community and the employment needs to be considered. And we have to assure the way towards creating more jobs so as to gain momentum for the energy transition. Now, the 7 proposals. One is the effective carbon pricing. What we are suggesting is that the carbon price be raised to the appropriate level. The scenario indicates that over 6,000 yen per CO2 1 ton, it will be supported, but we believe that the carbon tax, not the surcharge, but the carbon tax of over 6,000 yen need to be introduced. Not surcharge, but tax. And so the debate should take place at the national parliament and make clear what the tax income will be used for. The carbon price in Japan is currently at the very low end, globally speaking, and we have to face that and have a serious discussion on that. The second proposal is the renewables for communities. There are some protests taking place in some of the communities. So we have to make sure that the businesses are promoted in an appropriate way so that the destruction of the environment would be avoided. And for that, information disclosure and citizens' participation and returning the benefit to community would be essential. The third is the flexibility in the power system to be enhanced. Since there are going to be more renewable energy, we need to, on one hand, use the market mechanism, and we need to have a more advanced grid management and a grid flexibility, as well as to have a sector coupling. So for heat, mobility, and gas, for all those applications, renewable energy could be used in the optimal manner. So flexibility enhancement is really important. And this could be done by combining various systems. The fourth proposal is redesigning the power market that is based on fair competition. Looking at the current power market, it's very complicated and very hard to see who is in control. And for the new entrants to be able to trade on the market, I'm afraid more measures would be needed. So long-term decarbonized power source auction, which is to be introduced, including that new system, we need to revisit the power market. Negative power pricing and the central method, all these need to be part of that discussion. Fifth proposal is boosting the offshore wind. The government is talking about promoting floating offshore wind in its policy, but we need to have a target set as well as accelerate the transmission infrastructure development and develop the supply chain industry in Japan. In other words, we need to accelerate what the government has already embarked on. The sixth is the improved energy efficiency in industry, housing, building, and transportation. In any of these sectors, the policies that we have today are not sufficient. And so policy measures need to be developed so as to accelerate the energy efficiency of these different sectors. The seventh proposal pertains to the fiscal measures. We need to have a system and technology that are coherent, consistent with the Paris Accord agreement. And we have to have a criteria that includes that perspective in the budgetary fiscal decisions. And the cost-benefit analysis need to be part of that criteria as well. And looking at the budget request for fiscal 2023, as you can see, the DOE budget request for energy saving and energy efficiency, which is the light blue, is increasing, but that is not really the case as far as METI and other ministries are concerned. So the budgetary allocation and verification in light of the grand design needs to be conducted. So these are the policy proposals that we are making based on the scenarios that have been put together for 2030 and beyond. Specifics to transition into new energy system needs the discussion to start today. And it is with that that we put together this report that includes 3 visions and 7 proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hirata, for the realization of the Berkeley, the national laboratory scenario. She talked about the challenges and the possibilities of this resolution of the problems. So we'd like to start the Q&A and discussion. Please wait for a couple of minutes while we rearrange the setting. And for those of you who are online, please relax and wait for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much. We'd like to take questions from the floor and also from the online participants to deepen our discussions. First, about the comment of the Morotomi sensei and also about the questions raised by Takamura-san. So based on this, we'd like to ask Shiraishi-san to answer. So this should be the start of the discussion. Would it be all right? Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for very precious input and comments. And I talked about the risks associated with the energy, but it is important to position this report in the context. So that's something I really wanted to see. So I really appreciate it. And then about the assumption regarding the nuclear power, which have been mentioned by two of you. We talked about we started with the discussion about the feasibility of the achievement of the 2030 energy basic scenario. So the assumption of that basic report was used. So and also we tried to see the feasibility of doing this, and then many people had made comments, and so based on that, we had further additional analysis. So if we do not see the restart as is assumed, then in that situation, we have to think about the concept of mid-transition, which is in the political science arena. So we will continue using what we have, and then we have the transition to the renewables, and then there could be some uncertainties in at the time of the period of transition. So that there could be a situation where there could be a mix of the fuel, the fossil fuel derived power generation, and also clean power generation. There could be some competition, and then in that situation, it is important to have the integrated view of the system. If not, this would tamper with the stable supply of power, and this is what is being stressed in the political science study. So here, in this kind of transition, it is important to have the redundancy. So sometimes it is due to the miscalculation of the power generation. So again, I have to repeat myself. We have to have some redundancy in this area, and about the 10 gigawatt worth of deployment of this renewable energy. It is certainly a very ambitious goal. We understand that. Compared with the United States and China, we can say that this is moderate, but looking at the situation in Japan in recent years, it still seems to be very high. So maybe you can think about this in the long-term and short-term views about the transition lines and the major, the wind or major offshore wind. We have to have the 10-year or 15-year transition. So if not, we have to if we are not able to prepare ourselves for this kind of long-term view, then we are not able to do anything. So again, we have to try to understand the kind of things that we can do in a very short while. In the case of the short-term view, the PV would be the answer, and also the battery storage system is also very important. Betty has recently presented the PV introduction scenario, and there could be a support for that for the rooftop PV or for the residual houses or the plants. So the PVs are something that can be introduced in a very short while. So this is something we have to focus on. And then if there is the problems of the dependability, then 100 gigawatt level of the storage batteries can be introduced. And also, as was mentioned in our model, in 2030s, maybe if before and after the 2030, we will have the main power supply from the offshore wind. In order to realize that, leasing auction should be conducted as early as possible. And then at the same time, we have to plan for the production and the deployment, and also the legal permits and authorization for the transmission lines for this kind of a system. So we have to start early and also accelerate the processes, even in the case scenario of the long-term view. Thank you. Every year we have to have the renewables for 10 gigawatts. Looking at the situation in Japan, is it really feasible? Looking at the context of Japan, and then we'd like to invite the comments from Amol-san and Jiang-san. So these two comments have been heard here. So are there any supplementary remarks from Jiang and Amol? Amol, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. So I would say that Japan is not alone in addressing these challenges. that the risks of energy systems are quite evident in other regions as well. And the only solution is to have some headroom in terms of planning. And Japan is really fortunate to have one of the world's best offshore wind resources. Yes, it's floating, but the quality of the resource is incredibly high. Where we sit in California, we are faced with a similar situation, that there is very, very ambitious climate mitigation targets, and California does not have fixed bottom wind. It is currently only relying on solar. So recently, California announced some major targets of deployment of offshore wind, and there is very active planning processes. So I would say that it is important to kind of take the problem head on, really focus on accelerated and more increased deployment of offshore wind, and potentially collaborate with California, because we are in a very similar situation.
Jiang-san, would you like to make a comment?
I agree with what most that every country is facing the challenge to speed up the transition. Right, everyone has the similar challenge. The key thing is we're not hoping to solve the problem in 1 year or 2 years, 3 years. We're planning for ahead. Right? That's why we're looking at intermediate target 2030, 2035. So when you set a clean energy target, then the industry has time to respond. For example, in China, no one has anticipated they could have built every year 120 gigawatts of solar wind just 5 years ago. And again, China has raised its target for the current year to 160 gigawatts solar wind. So that's an enormous leap from 5-10 years ago. So having that slightly longer term horizon is really important to give industry a clear signal to invest, to build and grow. And that's why a rigorous planning exercise, as we demonstrated here, is essential to inform policy making process. Second, you really have to give industry their certainty to invest in the future. If you're unsure about what you are aiming for in 2030, 2035, of course, everyone delay the investment. So you will not be able to meet it. So this is somewhat of a chicken and egg question that you have to give industry clear signal. You want them to scale up, to grow, to build more. And the third element is really about the new dimension of energy security. The Ukraine war has really demonstrated that the volatility of fossil fuel prices and how supply chain can be disrupted due to import of fossil fuels. This is a critical issue for Japan. It's also a major issue for China. That's why China is investing a lot of domestic energy sources. And wind and solar is one of the cleanest and domestic available resource.
Thank you very much. What may what may seem to be impossible can be changed into feasible through various measures. There are so many questions that we are receiving, and I'd like to first ask Dr. Morotomi to talk about carbon pricing, which I think would be related to many of the questions that we are receiving. You have prepared a slide on that, so if you could talk about that before moving to more questions. Thank you. Is my slide up? Yes, thank you. At the JX meeting, with the participation of Prime Minister Kishida as the chairman, the decision was made on the carbon pricing. So let me share with you what that scheme is all about. The growth-oriented carbon pricing is the phrase being used. The backdrop of the discussion is METI and the Ministry of the Environment have been in discussions in parallel. Dr. Takamura and I were members of the committee of the Ministry of the Environment side, but as the name growth-oriented carbon pricing suggests, the argument made by the METI won. And what's shown here are what Prime Minister Kishida said. And what needs your attention is that it's not the tax, but it's the surcharge that is being used. And the carbon pricing should be implemented in ways so that the total public burden should not increase. And the GX transition bonds are to be issued so as to provide the fund for the investment. And using that as a fund, support the transition in the industry. And I think for the first time, METI is talking about the decarbonization industry to do the business in Southeast Asia. And this is the scheme presented. And at the top is what's called the GX transition bond, 150 trillion yen investment to be made, or over 150 trillion yen. To fund that, the government bonds are to be issued, called the GX transition bond. And as a source of that, the tax surcharge are to be introduced. It's not the carbon tax, but it's the carbon charge or carbon surcharge in 2028. And what's not shown here, emissions trading. What's going to happen to that? Well, actually, emissions trading will start this coming April, but in phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, like the EU ETS. And the full auction will start only in around 2033, which is 10 years from now, quite some time later. So in 2030, for the target that the government has set for 2030, most of these schemes are not going to contribute. That is the issue, one of the issues. So this is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of the GX ETS. So the difference with EU ETS is that it's all voluntary participation, target setting, and compliance, all voluntary. Which is a big difference from EU ETS. And this is the carbon emission surcharge. So this is the chart that shows that all these will be introduced without increasing the burden on the part of the public. So, assessment. METI and Keidanren most probably built up this scheme in consultation because METI commented that for a change, Keidanren participated fully or cooperated fully with METI. And regarding the carbon charge, if this is to only over 150 trillion yen, only 20 yen are public, which means that on a ton basis, 1,000 yen would suffice, which means 3 to 4 times higher than what it is today. Hirata-san mentioned 6,000 yen or higher, so it's way below that. So even with these schemes, it's not going to be sufficient to fund the whole scheme. Thank you very much. GX and the scenario, what are the similarities, what are the differences, very clear. So carbon pricing, we thought that Japan rather belatedly decided to embark on that, but Dr. Morotomi just pointed out that it's not going to be helpful in meeting the 2030 targets. We have many people in this hall, so if you have any questions, please raise your hand. And if possible, please state your name and affiliation. Yes, over there. Nagata from the University of Kyoto. Thank you for interesting presentations. First of all, about a year ago, at the technical committee, the draft was issued, and looking at this final version, I have noticed two big differences. One is the treatment of batteries, and the other is the social cost. First, about batteries, very simply. As Dr. Shiraishi said, whether to have batteries or whether to build transmission lines, that makes a lot of difference. In the US, batteries with a GSO and transmissions are TSO. So who's going to operate? Who's going to be responsible? I think is a very difficult question. In any event, for the daily fluctuations, that's what you're trying to address. EV was almost not mentioned in this final report, but looking at the Japanese research institutes, their projections rely heavily on the electric vehicles. They tend to say that EVs would really solve the issue without infrastructure. So I think that's a big difference between what the Japanese researchers are saying and this one. And there will be 10% that's remaining, especially the seasonal fluctuations, how to address that. The utility people say that the key question is how to deal with the seasonal fluctuations. Up to 2035 may be fine, but for 2050 or beyond, that is the key question. So that was not really clear to me. Second difference that I've noticed is about the social cost. You did talk about that, but in the graph, if SCC is considered, then the saving is going to be a very significant, you said in one of your slides. But as you mentioned, MOX, SOx, and particulates, there's external uneconomic factors related to fossil fuel. I wonder if they are included. Maybe qualitatively you refer to that, but I'm wondering if they are incorporated in your quantitative calculation. Looks like you're just looking at the social cost of carbon. So what's the difference in carbon pricing? As has been mentioned, in carbon pricing, when it is introduced, as shown in this purple line, would it really go up as high as that? I think the readers would interpret that way. The utility bills, many of the consumers are concerned about their utility bills going up while they support renewable energy. And if that concern is validated, utilities in Japan have applied for the tariff increase and approved. So with the SCC, I'm afraid most people will think that the cost is going to go up to that level. I'm afraid that will be the interpretation of that graph.
Thank you for your question. I'd like to be brief in answering these questions. As was mentioned by the Dr. Morotomi, the demand side countermeasures are not included here. So if we are to include that, then the system cost would decrease. So in that respect, ours is a conservative one. The batteries, the storage batteries are the large in size, like 100 volts, and then you talked about the seasonal variation, the PV and wind and the others. They have the the seasonal fluctuation. And LEDS is a new theme in the United States, which is to look at the long-term situation for 2050 net zero, and then after that the new target would arise. So in other words, in 2030 in midterm, we are able to depend on the LNG. So that means that it is much cheaper. And then for the clean energy 100% in 2050, then LNG, the part would be eliminated. So the balancing based on the introduction of LNG would be eliminated. So that could be the low salt the batteries or the hydrogen batteries would be introduced. But still at this point, they are in the proposal stage, and it has not been commercialized. So this is called the last 10%. So this is the last mile, and we have to walk the mile with the different options. And that will be a major challenge that we have to solve. And then next point is social carbon. And so this is carbon or the CO2 impact for the society. Researchers are now looking at this. This is based on the Nature paper. And they have the integrated model to work on the simulation for 1 ton. What will be the impact of the mortality with the heat wave or the labor productivity. With the increase of CO2, there could be a cost associated with the social aspects. So that's what we have shown earlier in my presentation. And one more thing I'd like you to know is that in this model, the social cost of carbon is not included. So when you say 289 yen for a ton, if this is the kind of price that you have to pay, which is currently available. And then on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, that would be 9 to 10 yen for the utility rate. And then lastly, about the carbon pricing, would it lead to the increase of the power cost? So this is based on, this is dependent on the structure of the system. So carbon pricing is meant for the changes of the structure. So it doesn't have to be used for this purpose. In the case of the Canada, they have the refunding system, and the same holds true with the United States in terms of this discussion. So the carbon pricing should be added, and then that should be refunded back to the citizens. And so that means that would not lead to the increase of the power price. So I think there are 2 hands here, 2 of you. Please raise your questions. JCLB. My name is Miyake. I'm from JCLB. Thank you very much for today's opportunity. I have a question. Maybe this is the question of the layperson, non-expert. You talked about ammonia coal combustion. I think that was mentioned just briefly. So I was very much convinced with today's talk. I think I was able to understand this. But when we speak about this issue with the government, they always speak about the coal combustion with ammonia. So that maybe when we say this apple is delicious, and then the other party would say the oranges are very delicious. Why is it that we have to have apple rather than orange? So at this point, I have to say that I'm not able to make any decisions here. So could you tell us a bit about the reason why we have to go with the suggestion or scenario presented today? Thank you very much. My name is Konishi. I am from WWF. I have 2 questions for the Shiraishi-san, and also slightly different question to Takamura sensei or Morotomi sensei. The WWF has been working on the energy scenario from 2021, and 1 year ago, we have 50% the renewable energy for 2030. So net negative figure, and also the power source price declining, and these are the directions that you are taking, and I'm very happy and feeling encouraged. I'd like to continue discussing this issue with you. 2 questions. One is how you connect with the social community. Time is limited, so I think it is possible to continue working on the 50% introduction, and then it is important to have the interconnectors. So so could you tell us a bit about the deployment of the interconnectors and also surplus power, how to deal with that? I think it makes sense to produce hydrogen, and then this way this could be used for the energy for other industry. So could you tell us a bit about how you utilize the surplus power? And then the same question to as was raised by Miyake-san, Takamura sensei, and here you talked about the ammonia co-combustion, as was mentioned by Hirata-san. It is not the economical, so that's the reason why it is not included. Why is it that it costs more? Why is it that the government of Japan is proposing this in its path for the green transformation or GX? So these are the two questions raised by two individuals. So I'd like to the Morotomi sensei and Takamura sensei to answer about the ammonia co-combustion and also hydrogen co-combustion. Why is it the government is trying to promote that? Why is it that the government is convincing the citizens that this is the best option? So could you tell us a bit about how we have to see this situation? And also Berkeley report is here, but many people say that the technologies are too expensive. And so in terms of economics, the government and the businesses are not looking at this based on the economic assumptions. So could you tell us the reason why we have to work on this? So could you give us the interpretation for that? I'm sure many of the audience have difficulty understanding this part. Thank you. I may not be the right person to answer this question, but allow me to start. So we have the maybe participation of the government people. This technology is costly, and certainly in the cost calculation discussions, this has been raised, and I think Dr. Shiraishi's the assessment is based on that. So I'd like to explain to you why. So this is only my personal view. The utilization, I think the government assumption is that they are able to utilize the existing assets, maybe thermal power plants or maybe the supply chain. And then that means that they are able to utilize what is already there for the businesses or operators. They don't have to worry too much about the initial investment. So that would alleviate this kind of concerns. So that's maybe the reason why we have to look into the future of the technology. So as was mentioned by Dr. Shiraishi, this is something we have to consider. And also at the same time, we have to consider the energy system in the long term. So it is quite important to think about this in a broader perspective. That's all. Thank you. Yes, I echo what you just said. For the oil power, the oil-based thermal and the coal-based thermal, I think the starting point is that they will continue using it. So in order to continue using it, the ammonia combustion is the only option. However, this having been said, my projection is that maybe they try to avoid the criticism for the phase out. So maybe a small amount of co-combustion is possible, but 20%, which have been widely said, is maybe difficult. So maybe they could have the ammonia co-combustion for some percentages, and then they would have difficulty acquiring the ammonia, or maybe they have difficulty having the economic viability with the co-combustion. So that means that we have to have a major change from the coal firing to the renewables. So Tokyo, TEPCO and KEPCO will not be able to change their status to the renewables. So that means that power generators would be totally different from what we are seeing right now.
And for those that are affiliated with Keidanren, that's a scenario that is unacceptable. So that's a political economy. So I think that's the dynamics in play here. I think that is the reason why this co-combustion scenario is a mainstream. Conversely, why is it that in the US that discussion is feasible? I think that's because of the administration change. It is because of the administration under President Biden. Thank you. Regarding the hydrogen ammonia co-combustion, I think this discussion is unique to Japan. And Dr. Shiraishi, I wonder if you have any comments on that and also about the community as well. Thank you. Let me first talk about the co-combustion. LDS to totally eliminate the seasonable variation. What do you use that instead of LNG? Hydrogen ammonia is one possibility. We're talking about the snapshot of 2035, and therefore, cost-wise, it's not an option. But to further reduce that last 10%, use the offshore wind to generate to produce hydrogen and ammonia, and use a battery. Basically, battery is used for the daily variation, whereas in terms of the variations over weeks and months, batteries are not sufficient. I think that's the rationale on the part of the government. And regarding the inter-regional interconnect line, tie lines, the same story up until 2030, up to 2030, they can't voluntarily build that. So theoretically, it will start from 2031. Of course, the plans need to be developed today. For example, between the mainland and Hokkaido, they are included, but for others, we're assuming after 2031. So I think our assumption is in line. Regarding the offshore wind, I forgot to mention this earlier, 90% 2035, about 9% is the constraint or the annual production constraint or curtailment, especially during some season. So the surplus of power, is it going to be stored? Well, economically, 29 gigawatt battery to be used, to be disposed, but depending on the conditions, convert them into hydrogen or build more batteries could be one. Amol, I understand you have a comment, Amol?
Sure. I would like to offer like a global perspective on this apple-orange question that I heard. And I think what has happened, so the question is that why are people still considering burning ammonia in coal plants, that ammonia is kind of derived from hydrogen? I guess there are kind of two reasons. First is that several regions, they thought that they will have to import most of their energy because offshore technology was still inaccessible. Now that has dramatically changed. So offshore wind technology has dramatically improved in the last 3 to 4 years. And offshore wind costs have also dropped dramatically in the last 3 to 4 years. So for example, in UK, which also has very limited land-based resources, such as Japan, the offshore auction prices are very, very competitive now. So once you have access to direct domestic electricity, the case for burning hydrogen-derived ammonia in coal plants as for a significant share of generation goes down. It may still be used for 5% of the time when offshore and other renewables are not available. But it is certainly not competitive when you have domestically produced renewables that can be directly used.
I see. Thank you very much. Ammonia, hydrogen, combustion, is that a good option or not? I think that discussion, that question could be raised as a result of this report. Thank you. I'd like to take a question or a comment from people in this hall before getting the online question. So I see two people there. So if you could go in a row. Thank you very much. Momoi from Kiko Network. I have a question to Dr. Shiraishi. Everyone is concerned, and I too, about 20% nuclear assumption. I'm not very comfortable with that. I'm afraid safety has been sacrificed. When there is a problem with nuclear power station, the conventional approach was to stop the operation to be made up for by the operation of fossil fire plants. So I wonder what backup option is being considered. And two more questions. In your presentation, you said that 40-year operation, 60-year operation. The cost is higher for 40-year operation scenario, you said. As far as nuclear power generation is concerned, many safety measures are being implemented, and I'm sure there are many issues today. For example, core catcher needs to be built, etc. So there's countermeasures which entails cost, even with those costs included. You think that 40-year would be less costly? No, maybe it doesn't make sense. Yes, if you could limit your question to two. Okay, so just forget this last question. Okay, about 20% nuclear, this assumption. Dr. Morotomi suggested that the demand side aspect needs to be incorporated. So with energy conservation measures implemented, would the current power mix?
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Birmandalensi from the U.S. Embassy. I was hoping that you could speak a little bit regarding the intermittency and reliability of renewables outside of Japan and Southeast Asia. There have been some recent views, including a slideshow by the International Energy Agency that said that in tropical climates in Southeast Asia, some of the seasonal variation is more challenging than in Japan. And I would really like to hear from the experts how persuasive you find that and what studies may exist that can address this question. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand over here as well. Yes, please. Yes, over there. Thank you. Ito from Central Environmental Bureau of the Ministry of the Environment. I'd like to thank you for issuing this very important report. Now, this is not a comment on behalf of the government, but you talked about GX, you talked about the co-combustion. So let me just share a comment about GX. To provide fund first, and then we cover the money afterwards. So by issuing the bonds, get the money and allocate that for necessary technology development. coal to be used to a certain extent to transition. And with that, we need to transition. And ammonia technology needs to be invested in advance so as to promote that transition. I think that's the rationale. Of course, we have to make sure that it is not used as the unity. Employment, especially batteries, would cost really come down in terms of economic security. I think that's important. And employment, employment increasing, I think is an appealing point for the national public, including the offshore wind. I wonder if employment would really increase in Japan.
Several questions were presented. Dr. Shiraishi, would you like to answer? So the questions were difficult, as I have to say that I am not able to repeat the question myself. Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I can answer all the questions. Would you like to? She is going to speak about the resource, about the backup for the nuclear power. Yes, maybe this is misleading, but it is not that there should be one backup the power plant for one the main the power plant. So we have the reserve, operational reserve. So we have them wait, and then in this model, I think in this here we have the PV and the solar PV and also wind, and then we have the calculation for that, and then we have the operational reserve. And so this way, this could be we can use the LNG or maybe the battery storage in each region, so that would serve as a backup system.
U.S. Embassy, Southeast Asia. I'm not an expert of Southeast Asia, but yeah, so the seasonal variation would be very critical when the clean energy constitute of more than 80% or something like that. So I think for the time being, battery would be would contribute to the reliability of such electric power system. But when they increase the percentage of variable renewable energy, such as solar and wind, then they have to choose some long duration energy storage if they are gonna make it in net zero manner. So that's one thing. But anyways, natural gas would be the first option to balance the seasonal storage at this point. Or yeah, in terms of seasonal storage, yes, natural gas.
Please use the microphone.
And that's not what I'm hearing.
Okay. Oh no. I mean, that's not what we have to choose. We can balance that, the seasonal variation and reliability of the electric power system and clean energy goal. So they can be achieved simultaneously. So that's what I believe. Yeah.
May I? This is the response to the Ito-san about the resources. The resources include, I think the Dr. Shiraishi will speak about how it is incorporated. And I think it is a very important comment for the clean energy transition. There could be batteries and the PVs, and these are the critical means that are needed. And however, they're not evenly distributed. So sometimes they are only available in the countries with whom we have some tensions. So there could be two things that we have to do. So we have to come up with the technologies which would not use the materials in other countries, and also that we could have the strategic investment. And one more thing, which is done by METI and also Ministry of Environment, the circular economy is what we have to create in the energy transition. It is increasingly important. So integrated the policies would be needed. So we pin high hopes on your agency, your department. And then Amol and Jiang will make a comment. Please be brief.
All right. Quickly on employment, I think Japan has a very unique opportunity because it's importing all its fuel. So essentially what you are doing is all that money is going out of the country when you're importing LNG or coal. So once you substitute that with capital investments in Japan, that is bound to increase employment. So Japan is a particularly unique position for the transition because, say, for example, in India uses its own coal. So it's sometimes does increase employment, but sometimes it does not. US uses its own coal and natural gas. So yes, the employment benefits are there, but they are not as stark as they would be in Japan.
Yes, I also want to comment on employment impact. There's multiple reasons why clean energy transition would add to employment. So in our analysis of looking at China, I think this lesson apply actually globally, is that the labor intensity of different industry are different. So our estimates based on China shows the labor intensity or employment intensity for new energy industry are higher than fossil fuel, particularly coal combustion industry. So once you transfer from a fossil fuel to clean energy industry, same amount of money will generate more employment. Second, one critical point that's being discussed in all three reports, we're likely to see a cost saving to energy consumers and industries. That money saved will be spent on something else within the Japanese economy. That will generate even more growth in employment opportunity as well. So that's why we have pretty good confidence that employment actually impact is going to be positive.
It is already time to close, but we'd like to take just one question from the online participant. Thank you. This is for the GX transfer system. This is very much in line with the GX system. And then for the decarbonization systems, so in order to realize that, I think I'd like to know how this would be performed or completed. So this is the summary kind of question. So this is a relationship between the scenario and the GX scenario presented by Japanese government. So this should be the last question. So and also Jiang and Amol-san, we'd like to ask for your final remarks later. And also about the questions raised by the online participants, we'd like to use the later opportunities using the website. Shiraishi-san, would you like to start? Yes. For the GX green transformation, the basic strategy is to have the new strategy, the introduction of the new social or transformation of the social system from the fossil fuel, the base one to the clean energy. So totally what we are trying to do is the same. So I myself would want to see the changes of the power structure. So I think there should be the pathway, and we do believe that what we have presented today is also or could also be included in the discussion about the GX scenario in Japan. I agree with what you had said, but about the pathway, especially about the pathway for the centering around the renewable. So the assumption here or the hypothesis here is different from the GX scenario presented by the government, in that it has the heavy emphasis on the renewables. So the further debate is warranted, and from our point of view, I think it makes sense to change the direction of GX in this regard. Thank you. Thank you very much. As was mentioned, for the carbon neutrality and the sustainable society, major direction should be shared by many parties. So we have GX and the energy in the business industry structure, and also social system or social structure should be changed. So there is a commonality between the two. And Dr. Morotomi talked about this issue in the carbon pricing. And Jiang-san also said that it is important to have they provide the certainty or predictability for the private enterprises. So again, the time frame is important. In the case of energy system, it takes time. So in order to have a drastic change, we have to start now. And as was mentioned by Shiraishi-san, it is important to start working on the establishment of the certain system, looking into the future. And this signal should be presented, and I'm sure the laws are now being prepared. So this signal should be presented to the public in a very clear and straightforward manner.
Regarding the direction of GX, the GX-related laws are to be formulated in the nearest future, which would determine the carbon pricing scheme as well. So I think we are at a critical juncture here in Japan. In order to move in the direction along what we presented today, we need to move today to make sure that that Japan goes into the wrong direction. So what pathways are we going to choose in making that decision? In judging that, I think this report is very indicative, and we have to make sure that no regret path could be chosen by Japan. We have about 400 people participating online, and I'm hoping that we can continue with this discussion. Of course, this is not the end. Yes, Amol and Jiang. Yes, I have to ask Amol and Jiang for their final messages to Japan. Please.
All right, maybe I'll go first very quickly. I feel that bottom line conclusion that we have is that Japan will benefit greatly from setting clear renewable deployment targets linked to offshore wind especially. That will drive economies of scale and bring down the cost of these technologies, which then will substitute the imports. Japan is a world leader in technology. So I'm a proud owner of Toyota, again, a Japanese brand, but I now also have a Tesla. And the reason I bought the Tesla because Toyota was not offering a good EV. So I feel that if on clean energy technology, if Japan takes a clear path, there is an appetite for Japan's leadership, but it has to choose. So I'm hoping that with this report and following work, Japan actually takes on the challenges of floating offshore wind and battery technologies, and we can all import products from Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for the opportunity for offer a final comment. My observation is, I think everyone recognizes China today is a global leader in clean energy technology, but that's benefited from a huge domestic market. The US had now, through infrastructure bill and Inflation Reduction Act, has also set a very clear target for US industry to revitalize, retake the lead in the clean energy technology space. Europe is doing similar things. I think Japan does face a choice, as Amol and Hirata-san mentioned, to decide whether to join this race for clean energy transition or not. The consequences are enormous, both in terms of climate and for economic development in the future for Japan. So we'd love to work with you and others in Japan to advance this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the speakers, and I'd like to thank Amol and Jiang participating online, Doctors Shiraishi, Morotomi, Takamura, and Hirata-san, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all the people in this room who have actively participated in the Q&A. Thank you. Thank you very much for covering diverse topics. And the Japanese version of the report is available today, only the executive summary portion, but then by the end of the month, we are to have the full translation version available. And with that, we conclude today's session. Those of you participating online, please exit from Zoom. Once again, thank you very much for your participation.